What's good, everyone? Welcome back to Jungle Gap. Today, I'm going to be talking about the best champions to main for each rank. So these are champions that have kind of stood the test of time and regardless of season or meta, stay very, very relevant. Now, this is going to be based on my experience coaching every single rank and also how well they've performed historically throughout every single season. Now, of course, no champion is just completely immune to Riot making changes. However, this list was made keeping that in mind, the likelihood that some random nerf to that champion will happen. So without further ado, let's get into it. If you don't know who I am, my name is Coach Leo. I am an ex-pro player and challenger jungler, and for the past year, I've been helping hundreds of players just like you achieve their rank goals. If reaching your potential is something you are interested in, head on over to junglegap.gg for more information. Alrighty guys, so going through the iron, bronze, I think also silver, this can all be kind of in the same category here. And so these are going to be just kind of like your very, very mechanically simple champions, throughout every single season, especially these champions like Briar, Amumu, Warwick, these guys especially, honestly, even in high elo, you can still play them. But why these champions are really worth maining, as your first champions, if you're new to the game, or even if you're just, in low elo, right? The reason why these champions are so good to invest your time into is because they're very, very good stat checkers. And they also there's not much room to kind of deviate as you know what I mean? Like you press your abilities on Briar, you go in, you either kill the enemy or they kill you. So they are champions, as Mordecai is even here. Just very, very simple, straightforward stat checking champions. And, talking about them really quickly, Amumu, you kind of have this identity that you're going to be full clearing, using your ult, repeat, full clear, use your ult, play the team fights on Drake. Again, very straightforward. You want to queue in, you want to press your ult. Just a super, super strong champion. I doubt that Amumu will just get nerfed anytime soon. Absolutely no reason for it. He hasn't, and he stayed the same. So nothing considerable has changed about him. Briar, she has received like some nerfs, some buffs, some nerfs, but I think she's at a very, very good place now where I don't believe that she's going to be receiving any more kind of nerfs. I think Briar just honestly has the most insane win rate. Whenever I coach Briar as well, like this would be honestly my first champion along with Warwick and Amumu to recommend to new players. The reason why these champions typically start to slow down in the higher elos is because, again, any champion that's just very, very straightforward, people are going to know how to play against them a bit better. They're kind of just, very one-dimensional, I guess you could say, which is very good if you're new and you're playing, against players that aren't as, experienced as some high elo players. And, other champions here, as we can see, Mundo is just, again, a super, super good full clear, stack dragons, create that win con, good clear, pretty easy to kind of just like land your cleaver, very, very straightforward kit. Not much room for adaptation, variation. You do kind of need to know a little bit about, how the limits you can push with your ultimate and your W ability, which is the little take damage and heal. But the win rates of Mundo, especially in the lower ranks, do not lie. Very, very highly would recommend. The only real difference between the silver and the bronze ranks, of course, these can all be kind of in the same rank. And by the way, guys, for all these champions, if you are, at least even here, like if you want to play Wukong and you're iron or if you're in bronze, that's completely fine, right? This is just what I would recommend relative to your rank. And some people may also ask me, oh, if I main like Briar or let's just say like Amumu, like what happens when I get to diamond? And it's like, that's great to think about that. But the thing is that in each of your MMRs, honestly, like, everyone talks about building champ mastery and stuff like that, which is really great, which is why some of these champions, you can honestly take them very, very high elo. However, you should just think about the rank that you're in, because the best way you're going to improve is just by playing against players that are better than you. Like, obviously not too much high elo, right? You're not going to learn much as a silver player against a diamond player. But the goal is to, okay, what champion is the best in my elo? This is just from my experience, by the way, coaching. What's the best champion kind of in my MMR? What has a great win rate? Okay, I'm going to play them. And then, if I feel like I'm getting stuck here, okay, then maybe I look at these champions and you kind of refresh. So yeah, you don't want to be switching champions every 2 days, but you do want to be, okay, relative to my MMR, like what is good? What am I thinking, if your goal is to climb, of course, look at the win rates, be like, wow, this champion is performing so well. There's probably a good reason for it. Okay, so some other little picks here like Rammus and Maud. Maud is again just one of those straightforward champs, right? You just ult someone, you stat check them. It's really, really straightforward. He has a decent clear speed. He's a little bit sleeper of a pick. Not many people actually talk about him, but he has a really, really good win rate. And Rammus is a similar thing. Very, very straightforward. I think the thing that makes Rammus and Warwick especially so good is because their gank is so, so, so good. So like you'll just find a bunch of kills when you play Rammus because their gank is so insane. You know, just Warwick's passive and his W making him so fast. Rammus's ball and his CC makes for the reason of why I believe these guys have such great win rates. Okay, so moving on to gold now. So the 3 champions I recommend in gold is going to be Volibear, Briar, and Teemo. And Teemo is kind of like the little, you know, pick that if you're feeling a little bit different, you can give Teemo a go. So Neferia has already been through the nerfs and she's already kind of been through all of that when she first got introduced to the jungle. So I believe she's in a really, really comfortable state where you can put time into this champion. I think that Neferia is one of the easiest assassins. So if you like playing assassin kind of champions, Neferia is very, very straightforward. Her combos are not too complex. You kind of just use your abilities on the opponent. You know, it's not like a Kha'Zix where you need to be like spacing out of your mind and, you know, being really sneaky and stuff like that. She builds also a little bit more like a bruiser. So it's a little more forgiving. And that's why I would recommend, and, you know, the difference between like the gold and the silver is that, yeah, some, you know, as you get better at the game, as you know more about, all that's going to change between the ranks really is kind of the champions, either their kit and how hard their combos are to execute or their spacing, or, you know, the higher you get, the more adaptable champs that you see. So the more high, you know, like chaotic games, like these champions do well in those games, you know, that's basically the biggest difference between going up. You know, obviously Warwick, of course, low elo games are also chaotic, but he kind of gets countered by that. Okay, he's really one-dimensional. Obviously, again, you can see these champions in high elo still, like there are very big outliers. Rammus is like a bit too one-dimensional, a bit too comp dependent in high elo, but definitely in lower elo, super, super good. So yeah, going back to the gold now, what I would recommend. Yeah, Neferia is a great assassin. So Volibear is also a champion that has gone through already nerfs, buffs, nerfs, buffs. I don't expect him to get nerfed anytime soon again. So this is why I believe that Volibear is a great champion in gold. He does require, his combos, what I've realized when coaching, is that he does require a little more kind of mechanics, micro intensive, just simply because of like, you know, landing your QE and some spacing around his W. And also if you go the carry build, right? Obviously you can go like the tank build or the bruiser build, but if you're going like the carry build, he's just more micro intensive compared to like a Briar, for example. And last but not least, you know, we have Teemo here. Just, I mean, I don't even have that much experience with Teemo. I know that it's just a kind of like the Mordekaiser. It's a little bit of just a slept on pick. So if you're kind of someone who wants to go against the norm, I think Teemo is really, really good. It will be interesting to see in the new season just how much emphasis there are on objectives. I think that just his control around vision, his mushrooms, his early clear is good. His dueling is very, very good. A lot of time in lower elos especially, people don't really understand or fully grasp he's blind. So people will just run into you and you will just kind of win most 1v1s. That's the really, really great thing about Teemo. And I think as a result, his win rate really shows that. Again, as you get high elo, the win rate kind of falls off because people understand how to play against Teemo. They understand what his blind is doing and that kind of thing. But again, these champions, guys, like I will say, you can still take them. There's only very few champions here that I would be like, this might suffer in high elo. Really straightforward, more jungle, something like this. Maybe a bit of an Amumu when you get to like Diamond and Master. You may start to struggle. Again, very straightforward champs. People know how to play against them a little bit better. So moving on now to Platinum. Okay, so 3 champions in Platinum that I would recommend. So the biggest difference between, I mean, there's not much, obviously, there's not much difference between these 2 ranks. Of course, this could also be its own kind of bracket here, Platinum and Gold. However, I recommended champions in Platinum that are, we're now understanding fundamentals a bit more, and we're honestly really, really looking for like that consistency. So it's this kind of weird thing actually, where what I've realized is that like in Gold and Silver, obviously in every MMR, there are going to be mistakes that you can punish, right? Even in Platinum. But I have this thing that in gold and platinum, like, you know, full clearing, rinse and repeat kind of play style. Obviously, this also applies here as well. But the reason why I've recommended Nocturne, Wukong, and Lilia is not only because they've been through, again, the nerfs and the buffs, they're in a pretty stable spot, but also because these champions are very, very, very consistent at fundamentals, full clear, use your ult, take a fight, reset. It keeps you kind of structured, which is about to maybe turn around a little bit in Emerald. I think these champions do kind of tend to struggle a little bit more in Emerald, I would say. But these champions, even in like gold, I would highly recommend as well. So this kind of category could be a category of its own. But yeah, just super, super solid picks, especially from the win rate as well. These champions are very, very successful at that playstyle. Full clear, make a play, use your ult, keep good tempo. They farm fast. They have really, really impactful team fighting as well. So, you know, that consistency is what I'm talking about again, where you just consistently be strong in a game and then you just make this big difference in a team fight. So that's where they can really, really kind of like shine as champions. So I would highly recommend these champions. Of course, these champions like Wukong can be played at like GM and Chao, right? Lilia, as of recently, it was kind of hard for me to place Lilia because I do recommend her, but the high elo you go, again, people just start to kind of play against the Lilia combo and her ultimate a little bit better. Honestly, I think the introduction of Melio as well, like one of the biggest Lilia counters, is a bit annoying for her, so I couldn't really place her higher. Okay, so now moving on to just Emerald. Okay, so of course, fundamentals always apply, okay? Don't get me wrong. You will still want to be, you know, League of Legends and jungling as a game is always going to be around, okay, you're clearing and you're keeping good tempo and your fundamentals are good in a game where nothing, or you're gaining no information. You're not having any information to play off. However, when there is information to play off, because in Emerald, people are also playing, they're pushing limits a little bit harder. You know, lanes are getting a bit more aggressive. The game is becoming a lot more chaotic. And so in Emerald, especially, like Emerald is just like an unbelievable like elo. The reason why I would so highly recommend a champion like Viego in Emerald is because he really makes the most of all this chaos. And what I mean by that is like, if you can just really dial in on the micro, okay, dial in on, of course, fundamentals important, but if you can fight well as Viego, you can just keep being the diff in all of these fights, okay, in all of this chaos that's happening. Sure, you still have to judge the fights. Are they good? Are they bad? Like you would in any other rank. And then on the contrary, right, you have Diana, which is actually more of a full clear champion. But the reason why I've recommended Diana now as opposed to earlier is just because she's a little harder to execute. So before, when you could go the tank build, I would recommend her from like, honestly, like Iron to Emerald. Or Iron to honestly Challenger. Like she's such a versatile champ, so many strengths. But seeing as they kind of nerfed her tank build, like the full tank build with Unending Despair, I think the champion has a lot more room for error. And I think that the biggest thing that players struggle with Diana is actually team fighting, because her team fight execution is a little bit harder than other champions. So that's why I recommend, just for the fact of her mechanics are kind of hard compared to like a Wukong or a Nocturne. And so that's why I'm putting her just one step higher. And yeah, Diana is a huge recommend, honestly, if you can, like if you are just looking for a champion to main, because she hits a lot of the marks. She has good like clearing speed. She has good skirmishing. She has good scaling. She has good like carry potential. So yeah, Diana is a really great pick. And so here is a new one that we're moving on to as well, Jax. So Jax is actually fairly new. So as you can see here, there's actually not many fairly new junglers, which we'll get onto in a second, right? All the jungle changes. And that's because I'm waiting for champions to kind of be solidified in their positions, right? And I think Jax has now actually solidified himself as a jungler, a little bit like Teemo, where like if the enemy just doesn't really know what your champion does because of your E, like because you're just like people are a little bit stupid and they're like, oh, I think I can fight this guy, and like you just outduel everyone. Some really, really good things about Jax is the fact that if you're looking for that carry potential champion and scaling, he's really, really good at that. He's really, really good if you want some agency, especially in the mid and late game. His scaling is really, really great. You can do a lot of things yourself. You know, you can maintain your farm, you can push towers, you can take objectives, you can do everything alone, which is really, really good. The only downsides about Jax is that his early clear is very, very slow, which I could see suffering in Emerald a little bit. However, I think that it's still manageable because of the upsides with Jax. So, the reason why I'm not placing Jax lower here in the list is just, again, I think he's a little more micro intensive. I think his spacing with his like E and his auto W and just like any champion that has like specific auto attack spacing, I'm automatically going to think, okay, we need to place him higher because even though, to be fair, the Jax win rate is actually pretty decent throughout like all MMRs. So Jax is just a great champ. I don't expect him to be nerfed anytime soon. If you like auto attacking champions, and that auto like spacing and good scaling and carry like hyper carry champs, Jax is a really good champion for that. He also just spikes insanely hard at like Triforce Sundered Zonya's spike is just like the champion's just absolutely demonic in team fights. So, okay, so now we get on to an interesting tier, two tiers actually, which is like Master and Diamond. So here you'll see two kind of categories of champions. You'll see the hyper ganking champions that just really thrive off chaos. Because there's two things that happens in Diamond and Master, okay? Emerald is usually pure chaos. But what happens in Diamond and Master is that you get a bit of both. You get a bit of, okay, we understand fundamentals and the game's a bit slower. And you also get games that are, okay, the game is really, really fast and everyone's just like monkeying around, okay? So Elise is always just going to be a champion that I would recommend, right? Elise is just like, she's definitely solidified herself. If you're like an Elise main, you're always going to be able to play Elise. If you look at any like high elo, even like someone like a Gurren, right? If you look at someone like Kirei, they're always going to go back to these like these picks that they're just really good at, and that in high elo they thrive because they thrive in those high elo situations like dives, for example, setting up with playing with your teammates a little bit more. So that's why I would really recommend Elise, and like someone like Kha'Zix. Talking about Kha'Zix next, I think that Kha'Zix is a champion that if you kind of want to take the jungle 1v1, if you want to shit on the enemy jungler, he's really good for that. The reason why he's higher again in the tier list than say like Platinum or Emerald is just again because of his mechanics. He requires some creativity. He requires some good spacing. He requires you to know your champion limits very well. He's an assassin, which makes closing the game out a little bit more difficult. You need a little bit more like discipline to not throw. But yeah, I think overall he's a super strong champion. Doesn't really have many downsides or negatives besides the fact that, closing games out may become a little bit harder. But he does everything else really well. Maybe his early ganks are a little bit something that you suffer from. But yeah, I would recommend maining Kha'Zix in around this MMR because also these champions are quite versatile, I would also say, because they can just farm, right? Obviously, every champion here can just farm. But they're versatile as well. They're very versatile. Maybe Elise and Rek'Sai not so much. You kind of want to get the game swinging and you want to gank. And yeah, moving on to Rek'Sai, just the same as Elise. Historically, just very good win rate. Super good in chaotic games. Solidified herself in the meta with all of these changes. I think that there's not much going to happen. I keep saying that, but obviously you never know. Yeah, again, solidified themselves in the meta. Hecarim, talking about Hecarim real quick. This is a champion that, again, why I'm not recommending lower is just because mechanically intensive. He is knowing your limits. He is so he's kind of similar to Diana, but a bit harder, I would say. Very similar. The team fights are something that you're going to struggle with Hecarim. Getting ahead, getting a farm lead is kind of like I'm not going to say it's an easy thing, but that's kind of expected, right? When you play Hecarim, the really hard part is honestly the team fights and knowing your limits and, your adaptation in terms of like builds and stuff like this. But would highly recommend his win rate also around this Emerald and above. His win rate starts to kind of increase. So that's why I'm also taking that into account throughout all of the patches and the seasons. Now, looking at Xin Zhao. So this is like it's a little bit of a competitive pick. So the struggles that you're going to face, firstly, with Xin Zhao when you main him, is the fact that you're going to lose agency, right? Because you are just a bruiser. But the thing is that you're going to have a lot of agency in the early game with 1 or 2 items. Of course, depending on how bruiser items change, within the next few patches and the next season or whatever, something like that. However, I don't expect, because the champion is just a very, very strong early game snowballing champion, in the new season, he may be, talking about the new season, ganking junglers might be a bit better. Who knows yet? But he's not going to be like nerfed anytime soon. I doubt that Riot is going to make bruiser items like bad or whatever. So yeah, Xin Zhao's just a very, very good staple pick. Very, very strong early. You can have a lot of influence early game. You can have a lot of influence in skirmishes. You can play pretty aggressively. His clear speed is like the one thing that's kind of sucks as in, but other things make up for him. And honestly, you can take the Xin Zhao. The Xin Zhao is someone that you can, kind of take to the GM Chal. You got to play like a bit of a Chad though. You got to play in the enemy's face a little bit in terms of like, okay, I've hit Sundered Sky. I've hit my item spike. It's like time to party. And the last one that's here is just the Kindred. So, again, like this champion is a little bit interchangeable. You can play her at GM Chal. This is just, another spacing champ. Why I'm not recommending her earlier. Mechanics. You need good mechanics. You need to know a little bit more adaptation again. Like Kindred is a champion that she actually wants to farm kills. Her clear speed isn't even like the main thing until she gets items, and she can go crazy about clearing the camps. But she is a really like a champion that really, really is looking at opportunities. Opportunistic, get some kills, snowballing champ. Ego the enemy kind of champion, and not really super. So the biggest thing again, guys, that changes the difference between these champions and champions in the silver and the iron is that they're not super just like, okay, straightforward, like this is what we can do. It's very, very much so, ooh, like what about a bit of this and a bit of that? Like when you're playing the game, you need to know and be a little bit more knowledgeable about different sequences, different, I've played this sequence out before kind of idea. Nothing like, okay, super big brain, but that's the biggest difference. Very skill expressive champions that you can express your skill on. And finally, we're moving to the GM and Chal. So the reason why I have Jarvan here, okay, I might have a little bit of bias because I'm a bit of a Jarvan demon myself. Okay, so Jarvan, in my opinion, is just like kind of a better, more versatile Xin Zhao. Obviously, again, you can play these whenever. You can play Jarvan in Diamond. I would recommend like at least Diamond, but you can play him in Emerald and Plat as well, honestly. Jarvan kind of ticks all the boxes. Okay, he's just your traditional jungler. You can never go wrong maining Jarvan, especially for Elo. Ticks all the boxes. Only bad thing, also with his lethality build, he's actually quite versatile nowadays as well. If you want to play a bit more like a carry, if you want to do damage, if you want to scale a bit better, you can go lethality. But yeah, he ticks a lot of boxes. The only downside to Jarvan is sometimes draft is a bit of a thing, right? If you're versing like a lot of immobile champions, your Victors, your Syndras, your Jins, he's insane, right? He feels really good because of his ult. But if you're versing like a Poppy and a Xayah and, like these champions that if you go in, you just die or you get blocked or, you're versing a LeBlanc, then he kind of feels a little bit bad. Still playable. I think a great person to look for in terms of like how to play team fights is a Gurren with Jarvan, and he always makes it kind of work. But I think Jarvan definitely has stood, through all of the seasons, he's still like this prevalent pick. So he's definitely would highly recommend. Now looking at Nidalee. Okay, I don't think Nidalee again will experience any nerfs. I think Nidalee is one of the most, if not the most skill expressive champions that you can possibly think about in jungle. So that's why I would kind of only recommend in GM Chal games as well. People, I would have to hope, which I can't always say is the truth, but your teammates play a little bit better around a higher tempo, higher paced game. And Nidalee is just like opportunistic. She's kind of like, if the game is just exploding everywhere and she can just be everywhere farming kills and landing spears and being skill expressive over your opponent, she is just like that champion. Tempo. You don't really want to just like sit back and full clear it as Nidalee because your scaling is not very good. So you want to get the game snowballing. Again, the biggest difference again between like some of these champions in low elo is that they actually scale really well. Like all these champions are good in the late game. Okay, I don't want to say that Nidalee's like completely bad in the late game, but you kind of are using the fact that in high elo the game tends to end earlier. I will say tends to, not always the case. And in lower elo, people don't know how to close the game out as much. So scaling into the late game, you're kind of at a more of an advantage if you do that, which makes sense with these champions down here. And now moving on to lastly, Bel'Veth in the Challenger. So again, like if you are really, really good at invading, Raptor invade, you know all these scenarios, you know, like, you know, if you know all these scenarios and how to play them as Bel'Veth, you can really, really just jungle gap the enemy. You can really flex your knowledge, you can flex your mechanics. You are very, very good, and she's very, very opportunistic as well. When you start getting your passive, you start just snowballing your mobility, jumping over walls, the skirmishing. Just like a very, very, okay, I'm better than you kind of champ. Very micro intensive, and also very intensive in terms of you don't really, again, I think Bel'Veth is someone that you don't have to be high elo to play. I actually think she's a pretty decent lower elo champion as well. But she really excels. The reason why she's really, really strong is for those invade high kind of 1v1 jungle kind of games. Because she can be a little bit mechanically intensive unless you are like an OTP. And so I want to talk about just like that category exactly, right? The OTP category. So, you know, a lot of champions are missing here. And so you can play any of these OTP champs, in my opinion, at any rank, okay? This really just depends on how good you are. So if you're really, really good at Kayn, you can play Kayn from bronze until challenger. If you are really, really good at Rengar, you can play Rengar from, sorry, I should say iron until challenger. Like any of these champs you can play until challenger. I would say that some champions, again, who are more one-dimensional, which is Fiddlesticks in this category here, and maybe also Nunu, one-dimensional champs, start to struggle a little bit at the higher MMRs because, again, they're one-dimensional. People typically know, oh, Nunu's going to do this. He kind of has one mode. Same thing with Fiddlesticks. If you find a Fiddlesticks champion, or what I mean by is if you mark Fiddlesticks, if you know where he's going to ult, plays pretty much, you know, it kind of makes the champion a little harder to play. So yeah, any of these champions I would recommend. They've also solidified themselves. I don't expect them to just get randomly nerfed. I don't expect, you know, Ivan to randomly get nerfed unless, of course, something drastically changes in Season 16. Cool champions to main if you want to be a little bit different. If you want to OTP, if you really want to just say, I love playing this champ, go for it. And then lastly, you know, I may as well throw this little category in there. This is like the current strongest picks in my opinion. Some champions that I've been kind of, you know, experimenting with and stuff like that. So, you know, in high elo especially, like these two guys are just, actually no, Jason, actually no, all these champions, sorry, specifically in high elo is like honestly the strongest in the game currently. And as you can see, there's like a lot of, well, all of them are like part of the new junglers. And again, same thing as like Nidalee and Bel'Veth. They're very, very skill expressive. They kind of tick all the boxes as well. Like they have good clear speeds. They have really good skirmishing, which is how you can be skill expressive with these champions. They're very, very adaptable. They keep very, very good kind of, you know, tempo on the map. You're able to make some, basically, you know, I mean, Jace in its own category is a little bit more micro intensive, but all the other champions, you're really able to make a big difference in all the little skirmishes that happen 24/7 all over the map. So that's going to wrap it up. Again, guys, like these champions, you can play Teemo if you want in Diamond. You can do whatever you want, really. But relative to your elo, if someone, you know, I get asked the question a lot, you know, like what would you recommend then in my MMR? And so, you know, that's the kind of the reason I've decided to make this video. This is what I would recommend for your rank if you have no idea what to play. So that's going to wrap up everything for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave a like, consider dropping a sub, leave a comment, and yeah, I'll see you guys all in the next vid. Season 16 coming up. Excited about that. I'm going to be posting a lot of content about that when it happens. But yeah, I'll see y'all then. Peace.